Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Today's webinar is the second webinar in our DNA kinship testing webinar series. DNA kinship tests are proposed as a method within the Department of Homeland Security for confirming the presence of a biological relationship between two individuals for immigration purposes, preventing human trafficking, and identifying mass disaster victims. This webinar series discusses the findings from research conducted at the George Washington University to offer improvements on kinship testing methodologies. The research was supported by the DHS Science and Technology Directorate. Today's webinar is entitled Evaluating the Use of DNA Analysis for Family Reunification and Global Comparison. Today's subject matter expert and presenter is Ms. Rachel Holderly. She is a graduate student studying forensic molecular biology at the George Washington University, and she currently conducts research for the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate in collaboration with SNA International. Our quick disclaimer: the opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. Any products and manufacturers discussed are presented for informational purposes only and do not constitute product approval or endorsement by the U.S. Department of Justice. And now, without further ado, I'm going to switch everyone's layout now to our presentation, and I would like to go ahead and hand the microphone and the floor over to Ms. Rachel Holderly.
Thank you, Josh. I hope everyone can hear me all right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your interest and attendance today. So, as reviewed, I am Rachel Holderly, a graduate student studying at George Washington University. And today I will be speaking on research I have done evaluating the way DNA is being used as part of family reunification as it applies to immigration, specifically in other countries, and comparing those policies. And in collaboration with the other students who are doing the other webinars this month. The opinions I am expressing are my own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, or the Department of Homeland Security. This webinar is broken up into 4 parts, where I'll review basic concepts for DNA typing, the scope of my study, and U.S. policy. Then we'll dive into the actual global review of DNA in the immigration process, and finally touch on discussion centered around this topic and conclusions I have come to in my study. So now we'll go to DNA in context. I'm basically going to go over a review of why DNA is important as a biometric. I know a lot of you might have already know why and what DNA is, and basic biology class in high school would tell you why it's important, but I'm just going to review it as why it's important for what I'm looking up and researching. So DNA is interesting because of its unique expression in each individual. Except for twins, each person has a completely unique DNA profile. Our entire profile is found in every living cell, except for red blood cells because they don't have a nucleus. So if the cell has a nucleus, then it has their DNA in it, and from the bottom of our feet to the top of our head, you're going to be able to compare that, and it'll match to that person's unique DNA. An individual's profile remains the same for a person's entire life for all practical purposes. And we can tell relationships because half of your DNA comes from your mother and half from your father. And that lineage of information can be compared. So how do we take advantage of these key attributes? Because of decades worth now of work in mapping our genome and understanding the subsets of genetic variation between individuals, DNA can be applied as a strong, reliable biometric, a biological or physical characteristic that uniquely identifies a person. Notice that word unique. Important to note is that DNA is the only biometric that verifies biological familial claims. The focus here is not the phenotypical expression of those familial bonds. We aren't evaluating ancestry or disease or the outward characteristics of family members. Kinship testing is about validating the relationship. So as applied to family reunification and immigration, it proves, DNA proves these biological relationships of migrating families. And it expedites the actual approval process. Now, I'll get into the nitty-gritty of that statement later, but just keep in mind that validated DNA relationship has strength to it as a biometric. Relationships can be tested, statistically relevant relationships can be tested for parents and children, siblings, and grandparents. For the sake of immigration, we test children under the age of 21 because that's who we designate as a child for immigrating with your family and family reunification. So the purpose of this study really goes into starting with what is U.S. policy and why does U.S. policy matter in global comparison, right? So we'll go into that, how I wanted to explore using DNA testing earlier in the immigration investigation process to expedite lawful immigration. Currently, DNA testing is encouraged as a last result, and that means we go through the entire process to the point of basically denying an application for lack of evidence until we actually use the opportunity that gives us this strong validation of relationship. There's many reasons for that, a lot of different laws and rights, and we'll get into that in the discussion aspect, but because it's used as a last resort, we have to go through all of the validation, all of looking at the documentation before we actually get to using DNA. I didn't just want to look at how the U.S. approached this use of DNA, but I wanted to see how it was used globally. Is DNA being used in other countries for immigration? And which countries is it being used in? What techniques, validated procedures, technologies are these countries using? What is the minimum value for reliability of this relationship to be accepted? What relationships are even being tested? And who pays for this? Is it on the government or the applicant themselves to take care of paying for their DNA testing? So let's dive in. Immigration in the U.S. is a hot topic right now. The debate on how we protect our borders, how we improve legal immigration, how we deter illegal immigration, the resources applied are all in question. Our current U.S. policy for family reunification is in flux, and when we look at the inefficiencies in the process, it comes down to sometimes years of document review. An application is submitted with birth certificates, marriage licenses, interviews, proof of living together, adoption papers in some cases. It's a lot of information prone to forgery and fraud. In some cases, it's refugees seeking asylum or people immigrating from countries with poor systems of documentation, making it even harder to show proof of that relationship. And it's after all that we get into counseling on in-depth analysis techniques. Enter here, DNA testing. With U.S. policy, if you look at travel.state.gov or U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the U.S. actually provides a decent amount of upfront information on DNA testing, where to get it, what it's useful for, how to take advantage of it. However, official guidance still encourages it as a last resort. The Department of State Foreign Affairs Manual 9 FAM 601.11 provides a detailed outline of U.S. guidance. Once DNA testing is established as the next step in the immigration process, that's when we look at what are those key points, what makes it a validated use for documentation. So we use in the application, if the applicant lives in the United States, they're required to get the testing done at a facility. The accredited DNA lab that you would go to would be accredited by the American Association of Blood Banks, AABB, accredited under their standards. If the applicant lives overseas or the applicant's child lives overseas, accredited labs work in conjunction with embassies. And if you can't get into an actual lab, the collection of DNA, usually a buccal swab, has to take place with U.S.-approved personnel overlooking the testing. An applicant just send in their buccal swab to a random lab and use the Postal Service. It has to be a validated lab, and you have to have actual validated personnel working with you to send in that collection. It states, the FAM states that short tandem repeat or restriction fragment leaf polymorphism analysis can be used, but for all intents and purposes, we stick with SGR because of efficiency and cost and how much we've improved in those systems for DNA analysis. Acceptance for the relationship must be a 99.5% or greater certainty. 99.9% is preferred in paternity or maternity cases, but that 99.5% is the actual standard. And the U.S. currently tests paternity, maternity, and as we talked about, looking into the full citizenship for immigration applications, and the costs are incurred by the applicant, travel, testing, all of that. So that covers a lot of my questions for how do we do it. Okay. Okay. Does it sound better now for audio? No? Yes? Good? Okay.
You're fine.
Okay. So travel and all that. So that answers my key questions for how the U.S. basically does it. So now I'll actually go into global comparison. And you, as we go over the global comparison, I'll also have U.S. information applied in my tables and so that you can actually see how it's compared to the other countries. So when I looked at countries that use DNA testing immigration, I'll let you read these, but there was 24 that had validated policies or where I was able to find actual legislation, and they had labs that they were associated with, 24 different countries that were able to use it. I did find that China had been referenced in some of these articles and reports that I was looking at, but I didn't find anything that validated that China had been using DNA testing in immigration. So I wasn't able to include that in my study because I couldn't find validation of the use of DNA testing in immigration. Another point I want to make is that France doesn't use it now. So what had happened was in 2007, they did an 18-month experimental period where they decided to use DNA testing as part of immigration. And in a court of appeals in 2015, they decided that it's only validated as a use in civil disputes. So they don't actually use it as part of their normal DNA testing. They'll use it as it's judge ordered or because of civil registration issues. And I'll go into that in a later slide. This is just a review so you can see across the world where it is that DNA testing has been implemented as policy for family reunification. Northern America, most of the EU, and Australia and New Zealand. This next few slides, 16 through 23, we're actually going to go over my results. And the black denotes a positive response. So country A is in the practice of B, is seen by the black cells. And then I include a graphical representation supplied as summary comparison. Asterisks will indicate supplemental information, and I'll highlight those as necessary. Okay, so this first slide shows that countries who are using DNA as part of their immigration process for family unification, they have a few different reasons, but far and above, it's insufficient documentation. And this implies that it's not being used as an upfront technique. They're not using DNA as the first way to validate a family relationship. If the applicant is unable to provide enough information to justify the claim that they are family, that's when people are using DNA in the process. And we'll go to the next slide and see the breakout. So, like I said, most countries are doing it because of insufficient documentation. Belgium will actually request it if there's a contradiction in their civil registry. If they find it out that you are not who you say you are, they'll use biology, they'll use the DNA, and then rejected applications that go through the entire process all the way to the end to get rejected. They'll allow you to reapply with DNA as a reference. Estonia and Hungary are marked here as not yet practicing DNA, and that means it's not part of their policy. It's not an active part of what the country uses as part of their immigration process, but it is listed as acceptable for reference material. So as long as you use an accredited DNA lab, they will accept it as reference material in your application, but they're not going to be the one doing the counseling and asking for it. And then for Germany, they actually have it where origin documents are not acknowledged. So they have in their policy listed countries where they do not accept, and I can provide that later, but they do not accept certain countries' documentation at all, places like Afghanistan. So since they're not accepting that at all, they suggest you use DNA, and it's more like a strong suggestion versus other countries that suggest it as a last resort and don't use it as an upfront methodology. And then I think that's, yep, Sweden also does it for rejected applications, and then Poland does it for contradiction in civil registry. And like I said, France and Luxembourg do it for judge-ordered instances. They're not doing it for the normal immigration. The next slide shows the application of DNA in their immigration process. So some countries, Germany, Hungary, Poland, Singapore, and Sweden, are only using it for sponsorship. They're not using it for their refugee and asylum. And then that will see some of the importance of that data in the next slide for who pays for the testing. So for the most part, these countries have the applicant pay for DNA testing. Because they're not mandating that the applicant use DNA, because they're encouraging it, because it's a last resort and on the onus of the applicant to provide sufficient documentation, they expect the applicant to pay for DNA testing. Unless, in some cases, as the single asterisk indicates, it's for immigrants seeking asylum. So for individuals who are seeking asylum, they're in that protection status. These countries will actually pay for DNA testing so that they can validate those familial relationships. In Finland, pays for the government pays for the DNA testing. Finland pays for the government pays for DNA testing, but if it's negative, the applicant must reimburse. So if you get back that it's a negative response, the applicant has to actually pay back Finland government. Ireland also pays for testing, and so does the Netherlands, Poland, and Sweden. Norway will pay for the actual DNA test, but they expect the applicant to pay for any travel. So if the applicant's family member is outside of the country, they're the ones who actually have to they're the ones who actually have to pay for any travel outside of the country for going to an embassy or something like that. As for how it's tested, what testing organization, for all of the countries that I found, their policy for collection of samples in cases of immigration must be completed at a hospital, lab, or embassy, the actual collection of the samples. So it had to be basically in a chain of custody. It couldn't be something where the applicant swabbed their cheek and sent it in. It's important because of fraud, too. You can't be a family member of the person who does the swab and it gets sent in, and then that person says that it's their DNA. So in this case, it's to, one, prevent fraud, and to make sure there's a chain of custody. So everybody, all of the country's policies indicated that it had to be completed in a hospital, lab, or embassy. And then the testing organization must be accredited in some way for consideration of the results. For the most part, the countries that I found using DNA just looked at an accredited DNA lab. And there were few differences. Belgium does all of their immigration testing, specifically at the Erasmus Hospital in Brussels. And so they're not accredited under the ISO IEC 17025 like most of the other labs are accredited under. they were using ISO 15189 as the standard for accreditation of that hospital. And then Estonia and Hungary use the Institute of Forensic Sciences for theirs, but also Hungary also uses accredited DNA labs. And then although Norway uses an accredited DNA lab, what's interesting is that they are working with Sweden. So Dynamic Code in Sweden is the one that they send their immigration DNA testing applications to. So there's some interesting items of note for how the DNA is actually tested and where it goes to in testing. For the collection method, most of the countries are using buccal swabs. In some cases, they will accept blood samples. And if there is a country designated as unknown, I could not identify that information through research. So I'm not exactly sure how it is. I would assume a buccal swab, like I said, collected by collected within an embassy or a lab or a hospital, but I'm not sure if it's actually a buccal swab or not. And then in Belgium and Finland, both use FGA paper in their collection methods, which is a way to actually store the DNA a lot better. So it uses an absorbent cellulose-based paper that has chemicals in it to protect the DNA from degrading and prevent bacterial growth without damaging the DNA itself. And they use that for transport, storage of the DNA. So they will use it also for Belgium in particular, or not Belgium, Finland in particular will use that FGA paper for the buccal swab as well. As for relationships tested, everyone is looking at paternity, but only a few countries are looking at kinship or the grandparents. So Australia, Canada, Germany, Ireland, Norway, Switzerland, the UK, and the US are the ones who are looking at kinship as well as parentage in their immigration process. And then Australia, Belgium, Ireland, and Switzerland and the UK accept grandparent DNA. Canada, I found, accepted grandparents' DNA, but only as a reference. It wasn't part of the actual family reunification using DNA testing to bring in the grandparents. It was just used as a reference for the children that the parents were trying to bring in. Looking at standard DNA workflows, so one of the questions I asked was, well, okay, all of that is policy, all of that is looking at the laws and regulations, but what are the labs actually using? So I was able to get some direct feedback from the laboratories. In other cases, I looked at databases and what kind of DNA testing was being used at these laboratories for databasing, or if this was a laboratory associated with a country that was listed as one of their accredited labs, what kits for amplification of DNA were they using? And commonly used kits were Global Filer Express, Y-Filer Plus, AmpSister, NGM Select, PowerPlex ESI 17 Pro, PowerPlex Fusion, PowerPlex 16. And the application of these is, so Global Filer, you have 21 loci compared with one YSTR for Global Filer and then sex determination, and that's 80 minutes of amplification. Global Filer Express is the same, but it's faster, so it's a faster methodology. And what's important to note is that it's the 21 SGR loci. So one of the things that had happened back in 2011 when looking at parentage testing was looking at when we say that the minimum value for a claim relationship, how do we prove that? We're looking at the statistics. What can we do to make sure that there's no issues with validating those relationships? And it was suggested back in 2011 that we do 20-plus loci comparison to actually make sure that that validation is as strong a comparison as we think it is. In some cases, the kits used are not, they don't stay up to that standard. So the PowerFlex ESI 17 Pro only uses 16 comparison loci, and then the Amphister NGM Select only uses 17 comparison loci. Interestingly enough, there are countries, specifically the Netherlands laboratories told me that they're moving into the PowerFlex Fusion 6D, and that might be a trend globally. I'm not 100% sure, just based on what the labs were getting back to me. And then, yeah, so they're moving to that, so they can have that actual comparison, the stronger comparison. And then the known minimum values for claim relationships that I could validate were a few countries. I couldn't get all 24 countries, but Austria, Belgium, Italy, and the United Kingdom reported that their minimum values for claimed relationships, 99.99%, and then Canada, Australia, and Ireland were reporting minimum values for claim relationships at 99.9%. And then Singapore and the United States reported that it's the 99.5%. When I talked about accreditation earlier, I mentioned that they're using the ISO IEC 17025 across across all of these different entities. These are accreditation agencies. This is a long list of the actual agencies that are doing that accreditation to the standard. So while places like Australia and New Zealand, they will accept AABB accredited DNA results, or a DNA result from an AABB accredited lab as part of the immigration process. They do have their own accreditation agencies, and these agencies are the ones that accredit the laboratories that they allow immigration to be validated as DNA testing at. Of note, the Finnish accreditation service in Finland, they only be accredited the use of immigration this past year. So while they were accepting DNA for immigration in their labs, the actual accreditation and going to the 17025 standard was approved this year. And then I'll leave it for you to read for a second. Really just all the different agencies that are being used to accredit these labs, and they are maintaining the global standard. And what I saw was that most everyone, Belgium, I said, was a little bit different because they use it hospitals. They go to ISO IEC 15189, but everyone else was going to the ISO 70025 standard and upping their accreditation to the latest release of that, in the 2017. So trying to reaccredit their labs to that standard was seen across the board. So now that I've covered my results, I'll go into some issues at play. First of all, the support for DNA in the immigration process, there's a lot to be said about why it's a good thing. It's empowering the applicants. When they're counseled about what it can do for them and how it can help them in these situations, it's providing information where reliable documentation did not exist or does not exist. And it reduces that indirect cost associated with legal fees and processing of documentation. Like I said before, you go through this entire process of trying to provide documentation, and it gets to the end where it still gets denied, and it gets to the point where it still gets denied, and then they counsel you that DNA is a great way to validate this relationship and reduce the issues that you had that might have taken you a year or more to go through in the first place. So it's reducing that indirect cost associated with those fees and length of time in processing. And it puts less stress on the family, such as interview processes. Having children getting interviewed, it's a lot easier just to swab their cheeks. On the legal side, for us, it's reducing fraud. Negative results expose potential fraud. In fact, Belgium found that they had less cases of fraud and less people trying to put in applications that might have been fraudulent by using DNA testing. So they found less applications for immigration because these people weren't trying to put in a fraudulent claim, and then also the actual cases of fraud diminished because less people were putting in fraudulent claims of familial relationships. And then the confirmation capabilities dissuade misuse, like I said, about how it's dissuading them putting in a application that's fraudulent. And then valid cases get processed faster because you have this actual familial relationship, and because you're brother and sister or mom and dad, and this is your family that you're doing the DNA testing for. That case is going to get processed faster because you have that valid documentation. And then, of course, improving efficiency is a reason to support DNA in the immigration process because discouraging fraud means less investigation. The less fraudulent paperwork that we're receiving, the less that we have to send information to the fraud claims for fraudulent waste and abuse. And then it's objective versus subjective analysis. You get a number. You have a percentage. It's got statistical support behind it. It's not just well, I stay with them every day, and we've been together forever, and that's important for these countries that don't have any documentation, and that's more of that subjective piece comes into play, because when there's been studies and findings previous to this sometimes, so when we're bringing in refugees or people who are coming from those countries where they don't have any documentation, we find cases where they were convinced into buying fraudulent documentation because it was the only way they knew how to get out of the country, and then that case gets put in through all of this validation, and you're finding that it's not accurate documentation, so then they're given the ability to do DNA testing to validate their familial relationships, and it's coming back positive, and they could have done that in the first place, but they didn't know to use it before. So that's some of the ways it could make it more efficient. Arguments against DNA in the immigration process are abundant because of the implication of infringement of privacy and the implication of disrespect for human dignity. The concept of family becomes limited to biology. Discrimination is that some countries, like Germany, are requesting DNA from some nations, but not from all. So Germany was getting DNA, they're requesting DNA for origin documents that they don't take into account. Like this country we find is a country that everything is fraudulent, and therefore we take DNA more often from those countries, and we don't do that from other countries because we know that their documentation is correct. So that kind of policy puts an implication of discrimination. And then the idea of non-nuclear families, against those where you're not bringing in your aunts or your uncles, you're not bringing in distant relatives or cousins, you're only bringing in the nuclear family dynamic for support. And then immigrant DNA are in some systems of record. I don't have it all listed here, but there are some countries that actually put DNA that will they will actually see if the DNA is comparable to any DNA in a national database. Which countries are that? I knew I wrote it down. Oh, right, here we go. DNA databases for asylum, Ireland, Lithuania, and Norway obligate the comparison for asylum, comparison to their national databases, but it's only for the sake of family reunification. They're not doing it. They're not doing it to try and be detrimental or discriminatory. They're doing it to specifically trying to say, well, if this person is in asylum, if this person is trying to escape from something, we might also have their family's DNA on file, so let's compare it. And then the comparison to the national databases is optional for countries Austria, Estonia, the Netherlands, and Finland, and the UK. And then the other countries listed in this study do not put it into their national databases. And then for immigration, DNA. And then the discrimination is also thought to be because of cost, where if the applicant is the one who has to pay for it, then the applicants who have money are the ones who are going to be able to do the DNA testing. Like I said before, the perceived reduction or infringement of privacy because of the fact that DNA is unique. It's unique to that person, therefore you are infringing on their privacy by making them do a DNA test. And then disrespect for human dignity because you have to take a blood sample, or you're making them go into a facility to get their mouth swabbed. And then another argument was that it's undermining other forms of previously accepted identification. So the thought process is that if you use DNA as a primary use for family reunification, you would undermine what strength that a birth certificate had before. And this is all arguments. This is the arguments that people are making. So going into discussion, as DNA becomes cheaper and faster, more countries are using it as part of validating their family relationships. The global trend has been, from what I saw in policy, it's going towards only allowing sponsorship and reunification of immediate family members. So it's not just the U.S. asking for nuclear family dynamics. It's a global trend for immigration. And with that global trend in policy, it makes sense to support those family members. So if family members are being, if nuclear family members are the ones who are being able to do family reunification, DNA analysis will support their applications, not take away from them, since there is a global trend towards allowing sponsorship and reunification to immediate family members only. Detailed policies and accreditation of laboratories is a standard practice across all countries using DNA testing, and the voluntary submission of DNA is preferred over mandating applicants provide DNA. That was across the board, far and above. They're looking for voluntary submission. They're not mandating that anybody provide it, but it is a useful tool in validating their application. So I wanted to cover some of those arguments again where I said it's against DNA. And the thought process are that it will limit the families, it will hurt them, it will discriminate against them. But if you look at it holistically, the families that use DNA testing, and because of the efficiencies and that could be found in it, especially things like rapid DNA analysis, the efficiencies that can be found in that process, it will get those applications through the system much faster so that more resources can be devoted to the ones that are more difficult, such as same-sex reunions or same-sex partnerships or adoptions or family members that have passed away, so their guardian is a cousin or an aunt or an uncle. And those applications can be reviewed with more resources because we've pushed through these more easy to identify cases. And then DNA testing should then be offered as a primary methodology, and it doesn't have to be said a mandatory primary methodology. And it could be offered. If we can offer it potentially as a primary means for establishing this biological relationship, you're offering all of the applicants who precluded discrimination. You can consider providing opportunity to request reimbursement after confirmed relationship status exists. Like some countries do that. You can get reimbursement if you have a confirmed relationship. And then make primary means dependent on voluntary submission. So it's still not making people do it, but allowing it earlier in the process can eliminate some of the inefficiencies that we found in just using paper documentation. That concludes my brief and my main comments on the subject. I'd like to acknowledge family, friends, professors, and fellow colleagues for their support while I conducted this research. Chris Miles at the Department of Homeland Security for funding this research project, Amanda Souther and Brianne Knight from SNA for their guidance and assistance with this research project. And not listed here are my professors Daniele Podini and Moses Shanfield, who helped me in my education endeavors in this project as well. The remaining slides are all the references for my research, and there are a lot. Great. So now that we've covered everything within my brief, I will now go over to the questions and answers and try and answer those.
All right, we'll go ahead and switch to our Q&A layout. And yeah, we do have quite a few questions that have come in, so we'll just go ahead and jump into them. Irma asked around slide 19, are police stations and labs used for this process?
So for immigration DNA collection, if you're talking about the collection of DNA, for immigration purposes, the AABB accredited labs are being used for, you can go to an AABB accredited lab for collection. So in effect, if it's an AABB accredited lab, yes, but they're not using police stations. It's more hospitals and embassies, so actual immigration personnel.
Okay.
I will say that in Estonia and Italy, they use their forensic science institutes as well as Hungary does too. So in those cases, I believe that the Forensic Science Institute is in conjunction with the Ministry of Justice is using Estonia. So in that case, they use the police stations, but most of the countries I found that they use just a DNA lab or an embassy.
Okay, our next question came in from Kimberly Allen, referencing around slide 22, asking after samples are collected and tested, how long are they being retained?
So I don't have those numbers 100%. The European Migration Network just did a study this year, and I haven't been able to review all of the information within that study, and they looked at the challenges and practices of identifying people in the immigration process, and they actually did ask everyone who's part of the EU plus Norway and the UK what their policies were for maintaining those databases. I have the information, I just don't have it right now. And for the most part, though, most countries that are not part of the Prüm Convention, and even some of them that are, like Austria is part of the Prüm Convention. The Prüm Convention is an agreement for putting DNA across basically an EU database, a European database, but even some of those countries are not putting it or keeping it. It has been initiated, especially in the EU at least. The European Union has specifically asked that you deter any type of maintenance of immigrant family unification DNA as part of a database. So they try and not keep the samples for other countries. And then Brent Cassidy says that AABB are part of samples for 5 years for the U.S. Thanks. Sarah, every country, the family gets the report as well.
All right. Our next question we have is the FBI has moved to a requirement to use 20 DNA locations. Do you see this as a trend?
Yes. Plain and simple, yes.
And if you want to go back to Sarah's question, you can elaborate on that. I apologize.
Oh no, that's it. I think that they had answered it. Is more of a yes or no question for that. In the countries that families get reports from labs versus reports going directly to authorities, they do provide it back to the families. And using the accredited labs, most of the labs that I found will explain the results to you. I think, I can't remember if it was Denmark or Belgium, but they have, Denmark. Denmark has a wonderful comic on their website to show you what it means. So.
All right. Next question we have is from Ann Gross. She's asking, she's saying she's surprised that Y-filler Plus is used because it has 7 rapidly mutating markers. Are the labs that use this kit using a mutation model then for calculating an LR?
Yes. Yeah, and I don't have that. I don't have more expanding information on that, other than I know that they are using a mutation model.
All right. Next question is from Eric O'Neill. He's asking if you could describe a little more in detail what you mean by global discrimination around slide 22.
Hey, Josh, can you hear me? Can we go back to slide 22?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Let's jump right back there. All right. There you go. You should be able to scroll back.
That's still coming up for me.
All right. All right. Did your presentation load back for
I
you?
went too far. Yes, it did. I just went too far.
Okay.
Okay, slide 22, global discrimination. Oh, yes. So the PowerPlex Fusion 6B, in their actual lab manual, they talk about the 18 core loci, and then they talk about 5 specific loci that would apply to other databases. So not every country's database has the same core loci, so it's more of a, so the PowerPlex Fusion 6E is trying to make sure that you can apply it to on a global standard. So they have other loci that they look at outside of, so just to make sure that it can be compared to anyone's database and still have a high degree of validation and discrimination. Does that answer your question?
All right. Next question we have. Do any of the countries acknowledge the standards of other countries for DNA results being submitted? Would this be a good area for an international standards body to work on?
Yes, so I think I did mention that, but you might have asked the question before I said it. So I know specifically Australia and New Zealand, they will allow for USAABB accredited DNA lab to provide immigration testing for their country. So they'll be able to submit that. And then the EU countries, especially if it's within, so it's not a third country national. If it's not a third country national, then they are pretty good about validating all of those techniques and accreditation. And then I'm trying to think specifically of anyone else who highlighted that they would allow other laboratories. Singapore allows AABB accredited lab DNA. And then Norway and Sweden work together in conjunction for their immigration DNA analysis. So there's a lot of overlap, I think.
All right. The next question we have came in from Francine. She's asking if there are any policies to take into account families with adopted family members, such as adopted children and siblings.
So all current processes other than DNA still support families with adopted family members, just so documentation and example. DNA is just one tool, and that's why I tried to say at the end there, where DNA is a tool that allows families to submit an application that can be processed more efficiently. It does not eliminate any of the policies that are already in place to help families with different family dynamics, such as adopted family members.
All right. Next question we have is from Kelly. She's asking, have you looked into the offset of costs by using DNA as the primary means of determining relationships versus the amount of time, etc., that is involved in reviewing the appropriate documents needed to determine the same relationship?
I have not had the time to look at it from the cost perspective. So I don't have those numbers accurately depicted, unfortunately.
Not a problem. We'll move on to the next question.
Yeah,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's not necessarily part of what I'm trying to report on. So I haven't in particular looked at those costs. But I promise you, many people are studying this.
All right. Next question we have is asking, in the USA, I would assume this kinship testing is being done primarily by private DNA labs. Is that correct?
I don't know if there's a primary or I don't know if it's primarily private DNA labs. The labs that I'm aware of and have been speaking with are primarily private laboratories. Just talk about how it's not really like it's not going to the FBI necessarily to do those testing, but any AABB accredited lab can be used.
Okay. Next question we have is from Sarah, asking, can you explain how labs and authorities manage reporting misattributed parentage?
So if there are concerns about revealing family relationships that the family didn't know about, they provide counseling. And in some countries, they will on their immigration websites in particular, they will. And I'd have to go back and look at those websites. But in some countries, they specifically said if this is Australia is one of them too. If you don't think if we find information that this isn't your family, we will counsel you about that information. And then, oh, you took the question away. For misattribution of families, they just deny the application. If the family is trying to misuse the system, they deny it and they don't let them immigrate there.
All right. We do have one last question that came in. You kind of already touched on cost, but just if you have a general idea on what the median cost in US dollars is to the applicants.
Across everything, it's about, I want to say maybe 400 to 500. I have to actually do the conversion rates for a lot of the pounds and euros. I think it's about $400 to $500, and then plus $200 for every extra family member you test. Median cost.
All right, we're going to give everyone just another minute or two if they have any last questions they would like to get in. While we are waiting on that, please make mention of our presenter's contact information. She was gracious enough to give that out to our audience. So if you do have any follow-up questions, please make sure to go ahead and take that down, and you can contact her directly with those questions. Before we do move on, Rachel, do you have any closing remarks or anything that you would like to send out our audience as we wrap up for the day?
Yes. Well, I'll go back to Colleen put in, Fitzpatrick put in again, the questions about misdistributed paternity. What about an illegitimate child? Well, if one parent matches, we don't consider that an illegitimate child because it is with that parent, but that's the counseling I was referring to. If a parent expects their child to come back as their child, that is when the counseling would take place off the results and try to they have no legal obligation not to report it, but they do try and help the family get past that showing that information. And in some cases, it's been argued that that's a discriminator because obviously one parent might know that the child isn't the other parent, and they might not do the DNA testing at all. But that's all on the applicant themselves.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, let's just say that's all I have.
All right. Then we're going to go ahead and move into our closing. Before we do, I would like to hand the microphone over briefly to Chris Miles from DHS Science and Technology.
Yeah, I really want to thank Rachel for this presentation. DNA is, of course, very important to the Department of Homeland Security, and we've had a great opportunity to be involved in that with USCIS and other partners in DHS that are looking at DNA for family relationship claimed verification of claims. But Rachel, this has been a great project, and we really appreciate all your work. If everyone would like to join me in thanking her, you can go up to the little top selector and click on applause. I think that's very appropriate since we can't all applaud her for this presentation, but thank you very much. And I'd also like to thank Moses Shanfield and the professors at GW that have helped in conducting this research, and it's a great piece of work for us. And Mandy Sozer and Brianne Knight at SNA International, they're one of my contractors, and they've kind of managed the project from SNA, and really appreciate all your work as well. So thank you all very much. I really do appreciate this presentation and the time for all the attendees that have attended as well. I think I saw 117 at one point, and that's just great turnout. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Chris. And again, thank you so much to our subject matter expert and presenter today, Rachel Holderly. We definitely appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to deliver your information out to our audience. Just a few quick things before we do close up for the day. Down in the bottom left-hand corner, we do have a PDF version of today's slides. So you are more than welcome to go ahead and download those directly from the room before you leave today. Simply click on the PDF file title, and then the download files button directly below will become highlighted, and you can download that from the room before you leave. Also, we do have the next two webinars ready for registration. You will find their links there for March 21st and March 28th. They will be the two final webinars in the series. So go ahead and click on those links and get registered for those events before all of the seats fill up. Also, you will see it there in the middle of your screen. We do have a quick link to our customer satisfaction survey. Simply click on the word "here" and it will bring up a new window for our satisfaction survey. We definitely take all of your considerations and your feedback to heart, not only in the delivery, but also the content that we give out to you, our audience. So if you could take a few moments to register and to also go through our satisfaction survey, we'd appreciate that. You will see Julian over there in the chat pod putting some of our plugs in for our website, as well as our social media, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. If you're not following us, we would love to have you on there as well. So definitely join us to stay up to date on all of our current offerings. Again, thank you so much to Rachel Holderly for her presentation, and thank you for all of our attendees for joining us today. We hope you have a great rest of the afternoon.